Today we're talking about a way to cook wings to feed a large crowd without a lot of mess. The most important thing when you're cooking chicken wings is the flavor, obviously. The way that I impart the most flavor into these wings is by using a dry rub, letting it sit in the fridge overnight, and then taking it out, lay it on a sheet tray, throw it in the oven. My ideal chicken wing is not baked or fried. It might actually be grilled. But if you're feeding a large group of people and you don't want to be actively cooking, working so hard, one way to get that smoky flavor is to order smoked salt. Use the smoked salt as the base of your dry rub, and that way you get a little bit of that smokiness into the wings even though you're just cooking them in the oven. Other elements in the dry rub, sort of borrowing from Louisiana Cajun Creole culture, is smoked paprika, garlic powder, onion powder. There's some dry thyme, dried oregano. I put my own little spin on it, I'd say, because there's also a little bit of cumin and a little bit of coriander in there. One other little technique thing that I do to set this recipe apart from all the other chicken recipes out there, I use a spice grinder to grind up the dried oregano and the dried thyme. By doing that, I think the flavor penetrates the wings more. You don't end up with those little flecks of whole dried oregano and whole dried thyme. Grinding them up, mixing it in, the flavor is there, but not the texture, which I find unappealing sometimes. Before I cover these wings in the dry spices, I want to take a step back for a minute. We'll just talk about the wings themselves. These are already cut into the drumette and the wingette, and the little tip pieces discarded. You can buy wings where they're attached, the whole wing itself. I will say, if you're hosting a large group of people and you're feeding them wings, it's easier if you cut the wings into those individual pieces rather than serve them whole. So anytime you're working with raw chicken, you want to be extremely careful not to touch the chicken with your bare hands, then touch something else. You can make yourself sick. You can make your friends and family sick. Don't do that. I use latex gloves. I think those are the easiest way to do it. You can also use a pair of tongs if you want to as you're tossing the chicken in the bowl. This is smoked salt, garlic powder, onion powder, smoked paprika, chili powder, cumin, black pepper, coriander, ground thyme, ground oregano. If you don't already have a spice grinder at home, you should get one. I think this is one of the really useful tools to have if you ever need like a large quantity of ground black pepper. Instead of standing there with a pepper grinder for a long time, throw the peppercorns in there, grind it up. You can buy whole spices and toast them and grind them sort of a la minute. Your food will taste better with a spice grinder. So mix up your spices. Just mixing it up right here, it already smells fantastic. If you want to be really slick about this, you can use one hand as like the wet hand to mix the chicken and one hand as the dry hand to season. Because if you have both your hands in with the wet chicken and then you go to grab more seasoning, it's going to clump up. It's not going to evenly distribute. If you're in a rush and you don't have time to let this marinate overnight, you could cook with it in an hour or two. The flavor might not penetrate as deep. If you let the spices sit overnight in the fridge, every bite of chicken is really going to taste deeply, deeply flavorful and just the right amount of salt. Take the time if you can. Now this looks like a lot. It looks like we're heavily, heavily seasoning this. I know it's raw chicken, it's not supposed to look fantastic, but to me this looks fantastic. All those nice dry spices rubbing all in there with the chicken, I know this is going to taste delicious. Cover this with plastic, or you could transfer it to little bags or whatever you want to use to store it in. Overnight in the fridge, take it out, onto the sheet trays, into the oven. What could be easier? These are the wings that were in the fridge overnight. You can see that they're a little bit more juicy, the salt in the dry rub. The way that they're glistening right now after being in the fridge overnight is a good indication that that salt has penetrated into the meat, and these are going to be very flavorful. So that's it. I'm going to throw them on a sheet tray, put them in the oven. The thing about these wings is I'm going to cook them for 20 minutes at a very high temperature, about 500 degrees. I know a lot of home cooks are not used to cooking that high temperature, but it's the best way to get good crispy skin on your wings. These sheet trays are lined with foil. You can also use a silpat. You could use parchment paper. Lining them in foil is nice because once the chicken's done cooking, you can pick up the foil and the sheet tray should be perfectly clean. There's no cleanup. Again, this is like just a very easy, hands-off way to feed a large crowd. As I'm laying these out on the sheet tray, I just want to keep in mind not to overcrowd them. If you bunch all your wings up in one big pile, they're going to steam and they won't get as crispy. It's better to separate them out, give them space to breathe, put them on 2 sheet trays, or even cook them in batches if you have to. Don't overcrowd your sheet tray. There's no additional fat or oil added to these wings. The skin is going to render, and then the fat from the rendered skin is going to help crisp up the wings. You don't need to drizzle it with any additional fat or oil. If you have any questions about quantities or temperature or time, just check out the recipe. It's online. All right, so that's it. Wings are going in the oven, 500 degrees for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to give them a look, drop the temperature down to about 350, and cook it for an additional 10 minutes or so. While the chicken's cooking in the oven, we're going to talk about dipping sauce. This is going to be my take on a barbecue sauce. I know a lot of people, depending on where you live, what region of the United States you're living in, you're going to have very strong feelings about barbecue sauce, whether it's acidic or sweet, whether it should have tomato or ketchup in it or not. This sauce is sort of a balance of the more acidic, spicy sauces that you might find in like North Carolina, let's say, or the sweeter, more molasses, ketchup-based sauces you could find in like Kansas City or Tennessee. Kind of like a mix of both worlds. Again, it's very simple to make, but it doesn't utilize ketchup. Instead, you slice some onions, you slice some cherry tomatoes, put it under the broiler for 5 minutes. By charring the onions and charring the tomatoes, it adds another layer, depth of flavor that you wouldn't get using only store-bought ingredients. This couldn't be more simple. You take all the ingredients, put it in a blender, blend it up, taste it, make sure you like it. That's it. This is our sauce. Like a minute in the blender to give it enough time for the tomatoes and the onions to really puree and mix in with the rest of the ingredients. It's like a nice, classic, a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy barbecue dipping sauce. I think these wings are great on their own. You don't even have to dip them in. They're fine just straight out of the oven. But it's nice to have a little barbecue flavor to go with them. I like the texture on this. It's a little bit thick, but it's still sort of sauce-like. In terms of flavor, it's really nice and bright. There's a little bit of spice and heat. There's Frank's Red Hot in there, a touch of it, and some chili powder. Sweetness comes from dark brown sugar and a little bit of honey. And it's very savory from the tomatoes and the onions that we pureed and all the dry spices that have gone into it. Just a nice blend of flavors. I like that we were very aggressive with the heat at the beginning. For the first 20 minutes, we were cooking at 500 degrees. That really renders the fat, gets it starting to crisp up. The reason we drop it down to 350 for the final 10 minutes is because the spice rub on the outside of the chicken wings is delicate. As we're trying to get the skin crispy, we also don't want to burn the spice rub on the outside. So high heat initially will start to render and crisp the skin, and then low heat at the end will make sure that the spice rub on the outside doesn't burn. I like the way these look. You can see that some of the fat on the skin has rendered out. There's a nice crispy exterior. The spices on the outside have like a deep dark color, but they're not burnt. They're just sort of toasty and nice. And as I'm touching them, they're not dried out. They're not cooked into oblivion. I think when I bite into it, the skin is going to be crispy, but the meat is going to be nice and moist. Time to taste. What I like about this recipe, those dry spices penetrate deep into the meat. It's not just a coating on the outside that's flavorful. The internal part, taste all those warm spices too. I could eat this whole plate of wings without dipping them. I think they're really good on their own. The sauce adds even another layer here. It's almost like if you took the best part of a chicken wing and mixed it with the best part of like a barbecue spare rib. It has those flavor elements. Really nice. What I love about this recipe is how simple it is, how hands-off it is. Great for feeding a crowd because while those wings are in the oven, you'd be hanging out, drinking, socializing, whatever. If you're eager to fry your wings instead of put them in the oven, check out another video that we did, sweet and crunchy Korean fried chicken. I know that everyone out there has their own opinions about chicken wings. Leave a comment, I wanna hear what you do. Are you brining them? Are you frying them? Let me know how you like your wings.